This episode includes brief discussion of abortion and also a lot of discussion about queer phobia. Listener discretion is advised.
I got in super late last night, and this whole day today I've been just running around trying to...
That's the best way to do an interview, is when you're just completely harried and just scattered. So that's awesome.
I know.
I always ask people, like, hey, do you have a lot of stuff scheduled right before the interview? We prefer that for maximum confusion and disconnection.
Yes. Perfect. That's where I'm at. So.
Okay, good. Okay, I got your script up here. The recording has begun. Let us begin. Take a little sip of the old...
Jen? Yeah, honey.
Okay. Later on, after we're done, I'm going to record like a fancy intro. I'll use some clips from the interview, but you're not going to hear that right now. Just trust me. It's going to sound so NPR. It'll blow your mind or bore you to tears. Either way, I hope that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Here we go. Welcome to Relationscapes. We're mapping our lives along the terrains of family, friendship, gender, sexuality, race, ability, and more. I'm journalist Blair Hodges in Salt Lake City, and our guide in this episode is comedian and author Kevin James Thornton.
I think sometimes people hear my stories and I'm laughing at it, so I think they think, God, I love this guy's really silly sing-song TikToks. But I sometimes think about how absolutely conflicted I was because I really believed it.
In his super fundamentalist church back when it was the 90s, Kevin James Thornton really believed it. And he also had a big secret. He had a lot of secrets, but it wasn't safe for a teenager like him, who was quote-unquote struggling with his sexuality, to share those secrets at church. Decades later, Kevin started singing about those old secrets on TikTok, and the videos went viral. You've probably seen some of them. But until you read his book, you won't know that underneath the humor, there was also a lot of pain and a lot of unexpected twists in his life that brought him to where he is today. His new memoir is called Big Baby, on endings, beginnings, and an interdimensional cat. And he joins us to talk about it right now. Kevin James Thornton, welcome to Relationscapes.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Can I start with a risky question? And I guess you have to say yes because I'm the host. So.
Yes.
Okay. This one's risky because I think nostalgia can be risky to indulge in too much, but I want to give this a try anyway. Your signature statement, the thing that introduced me to you, is your "It was the 90s" videos, and it usually follows a little story about something from the past that's nostalgic, but also funny, sometimes crappy. Like, right. You always kind of drop something in there about smoking, but it was the 90s, so that's what we did.
In college, I was a chain smoker, and I know that's disgusting, but you have to remember it was the 90s. And it was that point in the semester where I was almost out of financial aid, which is how I paid for essentials like cigarettes and Hot Pockets. Cigarettes and Hot Pockets, cigarettes, and Hot Pockets.
Or like how you believed something problematic from your super fundamentalist church because it was the 90s.
Yeah.
And the phrase is a reminder that things change, but I wonder how you would use it in a positive sense to be like, because usually it was the 90s because something kind of sucky is going on. What would the reverse of that be for but it was the 90s, that was great?
Oh, gosh. Right now, it would be something to do with the lack of cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's kind of ironic because that's how I reached the world, was through the cell phone and social media. But now I think we're in some sort of weird reverse universe where we're sort of regressing into some kind of modern awfulness.
Yeah.
So it was the 90s in a positive way, was we were not absurdly connected to these screens all the time because it was the 90s. It was amazing.
Yeah, and I guess boredom was more of a possibility in a different way because we can get bored by screens, but our dopamine's still taking hits while that's happening. I feel like we're experiencing a different kind of boredom today, where it's a boredom of of just flood of stuff in our face versus I'm a kid and I'm sitting out in my back porch and there's nothing good on TV.
I hate to admit it because I love stillness and quietness and being reflective. But
Yeah.
I am totally an addict to that dopamine thing.
Yeah.
Like if I'm having a moment of nothing to do, 100%,
Yep.
I'm like, pick up and scroll. Like,
Yeah, me too. There's been a kind of an ongoing question I've been asking several guests about. My wife and I have the disagreement about whether the internet's been a net positive or net negative. And I know that's an extreme question and I don't think we can answer, but
Yeah.
it gets you thinking how would you process that question of do you think this kind of connectivity that's led to our devices net positive, net negative? Where would you fall today anyway?
I just think we're in kind of a really awkward transition period. I think ultimately we'll sort it out. I mean, it might be another 20 years.
Yeah.
But I think in the moment because if you think of a decade ago, it wasn't like this.
Yeah.
And it's really recent. We're really crossing into a brand new technology that we have not adapted to yet. I think that's all it is. I really think that's all it is.
Okay. Well, some people have said it's just a net negative and they wish it never existed, but I think I kind of align more with with your answer.
Yeah, I think ultimately it will be positive. For in so many ways I can think of, a young in the closet person who feels like they don't have anyone to talk to. I didn't have that.
Yeah.
I felt like I was the only one.
Yeah.
And in today's world, I don't think I would feel like that. There would be other terrible things to come along with it, of course.
Yeah.
But, there's connection, and that's good. I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
It can be what we make of it, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the book here. You describe this youth group that you're involved with, and in part of the book, you're taking a trip to the big city, and you're all about to put on this play for the public in New York City, and everybody's dressing like clowns that represent various sins. And here's a quote from the book. You say, "This entire production was sex-obsessed in my memory, though I sometimes wonder if I'm overemphasizing that. During that youth group era, I was tangled around my own sexuality. So messaging about my body and sexuality might have stuck down in my brain a little bit deeper." So as you're reflecting and doing this memoir, you're also thinking about the story that you're telling and how time may have warped it a little bit. But take us back there to the clown show.
Yeah, it was my junior year of high school, I think. And we went to New York for a mission. It was one of those youth group mission trips. There was one every summer where it was basically a high school group vacation.
Yeah.
But we had to give it a purpose, So this time we were going to New York. There was a guy from my church who had moved to New York to have this inner city ministry. So he connected our Indiana youth group to Spanish Harlem in 1990, and we devised this whole plan of dressing the youth group up in clown costumes, and we were going to wander around the parks of Spanish Harlem, doing this super honestly condescending sort of message.
Were you AIDS clown or was someone else AIDS clown?
Yeah, no, I was definitely AIDS clown.
Okay.
Each clown had a cautionary tale
Yeah.
we were going to talk about in the park. And we're 16, 17 years old in New York City. We came from Indiana to save New York.
Yeah. Yeah.
The iniquities of New York City.
Yes, but this is your first time in the big city, right? You
Oh,
hadn't-
yes.
Yeah.
And it was honestly, it was totally formative for me because I had never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
I grew up in Indiana and for Indiana, it's a small town. And, suddenly we're in Manhattan and it was mind blowing in good ways for me. Honestly, it planted a lot of seeds inside of me. I think that was oh, you need to get out of Indiana and come to a place like this.
No offense to all of our Indiana listeners out there, all 7 or 8 of you.
Well, I think they'll all agree with me.
Yeah, they probably would. So you were AIDS clown. You talk about the sex obsession of this group, and you're not quite sure if it really was that saturated or not. I think it probably was.
Me too.
It reminded me of that thought experiment where someone is try to think of anything except a pink elephant. That's how these youth groups operate, is you're not supposed to be doing sex, but they talk about it so much that you can't help but be thinking about it all the time.
Well, and if you're dealing with a group of teenagers and puberty and emotion and hormones, and you're in this scenario where you're supposed to be talking about biblical concepts of purity and marriage to 16, 17-year-olds who are sort of going crazy,
Yeah.
it just, I think it just by default becomes the lead message.
Yes. How did
Yeah.
you end up there in this? You call it the super fundamentalist church you've referred to, New Horizon Tabernacle. You give the name in the book. And your parents weren't religious. This was my assumption. I think a lot of people's assumption was that you were raised in this, but you chose this.
I did choose it. And only because in that time period, again, it was the 90s, so there was no internet. And there really was not a lot to do in my hometown as a teenager other than get into trouble or go to church. So that church put on big, like, pizza party youth group productions. So it was super enticing. If you were 16 years old with nothing to do, you could go to one of many youth groups around town on a Saturday night, and they were having a concert with pizza and 100 high school students. It was a party.
Yeah.
And that with a little Jesus tacked on at the end.
Well, that's how they're going to save the kids. You got to, it's, they're fishing for souls. You got to put some bait on the hook,
Yeah. So, I mean, that's how I entered that world. And at the time, I think my mom and dad thought it was positive.
Right.
It's like, oh, our son is going to church. Isn't that respectable and amazing? And it's not that my parents were not religious, because I think they would say that they are.
Okay.
But they're sort of religious in a liberal Methodist kind of way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But they weren't churchgoers at the time, and they certainly weren't the really sort of strict fundamentalist. And when I say fundamentalist, that means different things to a lot of people.
Sure.
This church had like a rock band, and we all dressed like some people. I think they hear fundamentalist and they think, the women are wearing skirts and
they don't cut their hair and
right. It was not that brand. Whatever that is.
It was biblical fundamentalism in the sense of like just having restricted ideas about the word and like what that meant for the world. But they wanted to make use of the world to bring people in. And like you said, there's pizza parties and stuff like that.
Yeah. So it was, the presentation of it was trying to be very cool. We had a smoke machine.
Yeah.
We had lasers. It was very,
Well, I think Jesus did. I'm sure he had lasers at some point.
That's in Matthew. I think
it's in Matthew. Matthew 6
at the Sermon on the Mount.
Matthew 5 Sermon on the Mount. Yeah,
he had a smoke machine and lasers.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm pretty sure.
Exactly.
It was more primitive back then.
It was sort of the early form of the laser. They would just reflect light off of the scales of the fish that he was delivering.
Right. It was done. Yes.
Yeah.
It was a magnifying glass and fish. Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. You had this internal battle going on, not just about your sexuality, but about the world in general, because you also were really into pop culture. You loved MTV. And so there were some tensions there, too, about like making sense of your church self and your worldly self and your gay self. So I already see at this time these sort of divisions growing up in you, and that's going to cause tension like throughout the book, throughout your life.
Yeah. Sometimes, that memory is 30 years ago. I'm about to turn 53, so more than 30 years ago, But I sometimes think about that, how absolutely conflicted I was and just sort of torn apart inside because I really believed it.
Yeah.
Whatever that is at the time, I wasn't faking it. I wasn't, trying to put anybody on. I think sometimes people hear my stories and I'm laughing at it. So I think they think I was just sort of, a teenager who was full of shit or something.
Yeah.
But I believed it. But also I'm me. So I wanted to go see cool bands, and I was kind of a pervert. I still kind of am, and like I like perverty things, And so I was just really full of conflict. Yeah.
Your grandma's lamp with the naked lady.
Yeah. Even, and I say that a lot in the book, that like, even as like a 10-year-old, like you can tell that this child is going to be smut obsessed someday. Well, he is now. But
with that then, like, how did you first start thinking about being like recognizing that you were gay?
Well, it was in the context of that church. So it was seen through this lens of something I had to overcome. Like as soon as I was able to verbalize it and admit it, it came along with, and I'm not giving into this. I'm going to fight it. Ultimately, I'm going to get married and have kids and be a pastor.
Yeah,
So
gay is a
this is
temptation, not an identity kind of a thing.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for a hot minute there, when I was in my late teens, even in a little bit into my early 20s, it was something I was trying to resist.
hmm
Yeah.
I mean, the story about Timmy in the 7th grade was particularly touching. This is one of your close friends at the time, and you had this falling out where you were buying Guess jeans at the mall like we used to do.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
he said that you looked like an F slur, and you hadn't necessarily really thought of gayness, but that sort of like, it seemed like that scared you a lot, or just was like, whoa, 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 you know?
Yeah. So that's a story early on in the book when I'm, maybe in the 7th grade, like right before high school. And the the F slur, as you are saying, I guess
I'm not
that's
going to
how we're
say
gonna
it.
say it on the show.
I'm not going to say it.
Yeah, but people know what we mean. Um, in that time period, that's a word that teenagers threw around all the time.
I said it all the time.
Yeah,
And I was 10 years younger than you, and we said it all
and
the
it
time.
didn't. Yeah, and it didn't maybe have any literal meaning. It was
Yeah.
more just like a thing you say to like piss off your friends or
Yeah.
something. But yeah, that is sort of a formative moment because I had a friend and we were both maybe 12 years old, and he kept saying it.
hmm
And it was so frequent, it sort of pierced through the commonness of it, and it started to pierce into, "Oh, wait, he knows something about me," and it was really scary,
Yeah.
to hear someone saying that over and over. Like, he was a close friend, so he was starting to pick up on something more,
hmm
and in a 12-year-old sort of way, just kept drilling it. So it was yeah, it's an awful memory. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a thing that when I tell it, either in the book or, sometimes I tell that story on stage. I have a way of, like, spinning all of this into, like, an awful funniness,
Right.
but
Well, we'll talk about that more too, because there's some stuff
okay,
in
yeah.
the book where I was like, "That's a little different than the story
Yeah,
I remember from TikTok."
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, let's talk about your Jesus journal for a second, because this is really cool. This is like documentary evidence that you had, like real time
Mhm.
evidence of how you were, quote, struggling with your sexuality as a teenager, and you write about it in the book. You're about 17-ish. You had led on a girl, Christy. This is the pastor's daughter. And you
Mhm.
had made friends with a rebel girl named Trish. This could have been such a good sitcom or some sort of.
Yeah.
It's perfect for it. But what
It's
did
in the
you?
works.
Yeah. Oh, good. Are you
Yeah, yeah.
serious?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
wow. Talk about the journal as what it was like to actually have this artifact from that time and be drawing from it.
Yeah, I probably filled up maybe a dozen of those, like, paperback journals you would get at a drugstore throughout my teenage years, and I wish I still had them.
Hmm.
At some point, I threw them all in a dumpster,
Hmm.
and because I was sort of pretending on paper, and I'm not sure for who, I guess myself, but I was writing these journal entries of what I thought, like, a Christian man would start to document about his personal walk with Jesus.
Yeah.
And little by little, honest sentences start creeping into these journal entries. And I have a memory of I was probably 18 years old. It was right at the end of high school. And I wrote the words, "I think I might be gay," in this
hmm
book. And I sat there and looked at it for a second, and then I tore the page out and threw it away. And even years later, like when I would like flip through that journal to just remember or the where I came from, I would see that torn out page of the book. And I wish I still had it. It's
Wow.
even for myself, it was poignant like 10 years later to be like, "Oh, there's that page I tore." I tried to be honest with myself.
And
And
you tore it out.
I could only bear it for a moment.
Is the throwing away part of that same story? Was it a thing of like, I can't schlep these around anymore? Or was it like you needed to not have these? That's a sort of tearing of a page out too, maybe.
And maybe, yeah, you could be right. I remember, I mean, God, also later in the book, I become this sort of lost vagabond
hmm
for a long time, for all of my young adult life. And I was just tired of carrying so much shit around with me.
Mm.
So I had this box in the trunk of my car of those journals, and I remember I was moving and moving and on to the next place, and I'm like, I need to lighten this load. And I remember
hmm
that I grabbed that book of journals, and I'm like, I don't need these, and I chucked them into a dumpster.
Wow.
I wish I still had them.
Wow.
But I don't.
Now
Yeah.
I still do that occasionally, but I'll like take a picture of it on my phone that I'll never look at ever again. But I'm
Yeah.
like, I took a picture of
You
it, so I feel
scan-
better about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is where the story starts getting really spicy. You're still trying to figure yourself out, and it seemed like you pursued sex with a girl, maybe in part. You weren't supposed to be doing that because you were Christian, but at the same
Yeah.
time, it also seemed like you were trying to be like, it's more important to be hetero than to
Yes.
not be having sex, and that maybe is making this okay.
Completely. Yeah. I mean, that goes along with that, just the total conflict I was in on so many levels and layers. And it's hard to describe to someone maybe who hasn't done it, the way you can sort of wall things off in your own mind to make sense of this like cognitive dissonance you're living in. And I did that to big extremes. But yeah, what you're saying is right. Like premarital sex was a sin, but I would rather that happen than be gay. So maybe if I go ahead and start doing this, something inside me will fix itself or something.
Yeah.
It's, it's a lot of kind of fucked up layers, I guess.
Yeah, and I mentioned Trish earlier. She became pregnant. This to me, this is a part of the book I didn't expect at all.
Yeah.
I don't remember seeing any TikToks that sort of explore this, and I
No.
don't know how you could do it in your typical way, which is
Yeah.
she got pregnant, had an abortion, which in
Yeah.
your faith was also a catastrophe.
Oh man.
And at the same time, you're still part of the youth group, and they're
Yeah.
raising money to send you to go live in New York as a kind of mission trip. So
Yeah.
it seems like the story of a hypocrite here. If people want to
Yeah.
read this really unkindly,
Sure.
I see a person who's torn between who they are and who they think they need to be, trying to bring those worlds together.
And so, I mean, you're right. That's the part of the book that I think for most readers, where things are going to take a really unexpected turn.
Yeah.
And I had to make a choice, like what kind of book I was writing.
Yeah.
And I know one comment that's already going to happen is, God, I love this guy's like really silly sing-song TikToks. And here's this book that, it has a lot of funny moments, but it also has a lot of heavy moments. And,
Yeah, it sure does.
I just decided to just not try and mold it into what I thought a social media audience would want. I just wrote the truth, and for better or worse, I just wrote the truth.
See, but I think people that paid attention could see the undercurrent of feeling. Like you've done some videos.
Yes.
I remember this one you did of you walking around like an empty mall. I think you had gone back home for the holidays or something. And it's such a melancholy, beautiful, like little short film. And there's so much heart to it.
In recent years, when I come to visit my parents, I'll come take a stroll through this building. I don't know why. I don't even know why it's still open. There's almost nothing in here. It's actually only been in recent years that they finally shut off this water fountain. I have a memory of being really young, like 7 or 8 years old, and the water used to just like shoot up and then fall back down upon itself. And I remember telling my mom that I thought the water looked like people throwing their clothes off. I'm in such a weird place. Like, I don't know what's next. And I feel good. But, I don't know. For most of my life, I've usually had some kind of sense of, like, where I'm headed. And I don't right now. I don't know what 2024 has in store. To everyone embracing change, or uncertainty, or heartbreak, or the unknown, I hope your 2024 is everything that it's supposed to be. Happy New Year.
So I see what you're saying, and I think, yeah, casual people who watch your TikToks and just kind of just know you as it's the 90s guy that maybe didn't catch all your stuff, I think there's some surprises here in terms of like, oh, this isn't just like funny, goofy stuff. But I think people that pay more attention to your stuff, I don't think it'll necessarily come as that big of a surprise if they've really been following you.
Yeah, you're right. And that's sort of one of the weird things about a social media audience is an algorithm sort of divides everyone up into different categories. So I have different kinds of audience members.
Yeah.
And even if they don't know that they're different kinds of audience members, but you're right. Like the truest me is I have a lot of melancholy in me. And it goes along with the comedy stuff. I'm I have a lot of things going on, even still today, you know.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
when people meet you on the street, I think I've seen you talk about how like they might think you're just as always happy-go-lucky, but sometimes maybe you're having a shitty day, or like you're
Well,
just taken off guard or something, or
and that's also like during the pandemic when my videos started to take off. The nature of what I was doing sort of allowed the viewer to make me whoever they wanted me to be, you know? And so
yeah.
for sure, a lot of people were like, oh, this guy is this sort of extremely extrovert, really kind of bubbly. So, you know, I would see people in the cereal aisle and I mean, it still happens if you aren't ready for it. It's like, oh wait, you're kind of a shy, introverted. Like, why aren't you singing right now next to the grape nuts? You
Yeah.
know?
You don't have your headphone, your
Yeah.
earbuds in.
Right.
What's going on?
Yeah.
This isn't auto-tuned at all.
Right. I mean, not that that is not me, but it's a little sliver of me.
Sure.
And it's a me that really, it takes me a while around close friends to be that guy. So weirdly, like strangers are getting a version of me that I really in the past would only show a couple of people. It's a weird thing to live through.
Well,
Yeah.
and you also do stand-up too. So
Yes.
people might assume that someone who does that, but of course, anybody who has spent any time paying attention to stand-up folks also know there's introversion there. It's not everybody that's in that work is like wants to be in everybody's face.
Yeah, I mean, stand-up comedians are either sort of very extroverted people who rarely turn off, or very introverted people who only turn it on when the mic is in their hand. And I'm one of those people. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, the pandemic was when I got introduced to your stuff. And I still remember the first video I saw, probably one of your most viral ones where you're talking about speaking in tongues. But the backstory is really interesting. So you had this experience with the girlfriend at the time. The abortion happened. Your church raises money for you to go live in New York. You do. But then the chickens come home to roost. They kind of find out what you'd been up to, and you got to go back home. You're kind of the prodigal son returning. And so that's the setup for this TikTok reel, which I'm pretty sure is the first one I saw of you, and I'm going to play it here.
My super fundamentalist church, we did not speak in tongues, but we were open to the idea of speaking in tongues. And that Sunday morning, I sort of knew I was going to do it because I'm dramatic. And in the middle of the service, I said out loud, Shamala Hamala. And everyone around me was like, oh my God, it's happening. And everyone started saying Shamala Hamala. And I was sort of like, you guys are just copying what I'm saying. But now we're all crying, saying Shamala Hamala. And my pastor said it was the language that angels spoke. And I imagined the scene in heaven where the angels were like, what's up, Jesus? Shamala Hamala.
Okay, so love this story. And these videos played a big part in changing your life. But I think you're dropping hints in the video that there's more to the story. And we get that in the book. Like you say, you sort of knew you would speak in tongues because you're dramatic. It's a funny line, but there's like real stuff behind that. That's a way of glossing some real pain that was going on. And your book adds so much context to this story that's otherwise this funny, cute little video. This story is a heavy story, actually.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, really, to be honest, almost every single one of my auto-tune hits of social media come from fairly dark places, and it was an accident that I started singing the stories into that little audio filter that people associate me with.
Yeah.
But that's the thing that started to tickle me. I think the thing that worked was, this is an awful memory, but now I'm singing it in that sound. It was just like, this is a level of absurdity that makes me laugh,
Yeah.
And so I think there's something in that, whatever that is, the mix of this sort of awful memory that is familiar to a lot of people. Like a lot of people have, similar stories, but to sing this terrible memory in this ridiculous sound to me, it was almost like healing in a way. And I think it was for other people of like, to remember where we came from. And sometimes it was really awful, but you know what? I'm good today.
Mm.
And, when I think about myself now in my church, and the thing you're referring to is I was trying to make everyone believe. No, that's not the right word. I needed everyone to believe I was good.
Can I have you read this actually? Because I think from
Sure.
the book, I
Yeah.
think, and this will be great stacking up against the TikTok version of the story. So this is on page,
Oh, sure.
in my copy, it's on 77. This is an advanced copy, so it may have changed, but this is your Shamala Hamala chapter.
Yeah.
And I loved reading this, having already seen the reel and kind of getting this other story.
Mm-hmm. It was around this era that Pastor Greg started preaching about the gifts of the Spirit, an umbrella term for certain magical powers that followers of Christ are alleged to be capable of, if they are good enough believers. Some are not so remarkable, such as wisdom, knowledge, and faith, but others, like prophecy, channeling direct messages from God Himself, sounded fascinating. One such trick was known as speaking in tongues. It's where you can speak in a language you've never learned, specifically the language of the heavens. Pastor Greg said it was the language of the Holy Spirit and what the angels speak. The Holy Spirit, of Gifts of the Spirit fame, was allegedly an entirely other entity from God and Jesus. In fact, what they were telling us was that God and Jesus don't interact with us much at all, except by way of their liaison, the Holy Spirit. So, the way I was reading it, that was the juiciest part of the whole religion. I thought if everyone at church saw that I had the gifts of the Spirit, they could finally see that I was good and they would take me back in. Unfortunately, in order to understand the messages delivered by someone speaking in tongues, you need another superpower called interpretation of tongues. But hey, you got to start somewhere. I visited a Pentecostal church in town I had heard spoken tongues, and it was electric. Most of the congregation sat with their eyes closed, hands raised to the heavens, all speaking in tongues at once. I couldn't believe my ears. They made it look so easy. Just open your mouth and let the Holy Spirit take over. Back at my home church the next Sunday, as Pastor Greg brought the worship music down quiet and eventually ended in silence, I tried to poke around in my heart and find if the Holy Spirit had anything to say. Not that I could afford to give his ghostliness an option. Come on, Holy Ghost, show up and use me. I didn't know how to tell if I was filled with the Spirit, but I knew I was bursting at the seams with sorrow and loneliness. I couldn't exist like this any longer, so something had to change if I was going to continue living. My life depended on it. I'm going to bring the Holy Spirit in here. And then it all spilled out. Shamala hamala. I heard a few quiet gasps as I squeezed out a few more nonsensical syllables before choking on the nerves. A few people started to mutter some feeble attempts at tongues of their own, but this was not commonplace for our congregation. Mostly they were confused and uncomfortable. After the world's longest silence, Pastor Greg, without a word about my Holy Spirit eruption, said a prayer to bring our worship service to a close. And I sat there alone in my wet armpits, feeling like everyone behind me was glaring at the back of my head. When I exited the sanctuary alone after service that day, I spoke to no one. I wasn't sure if the Holy Spirit had moved through me, but it didn't feel like it. And it wasn't clear whether anybody else believed the Spirit had moved through me either. My attempt at redemption had failed, and now I was even more humiliated. I just wanted to say, guys, I'm good. I'm good. Please see me and accept me as I am. Though my tongue's gambit failed to yield direct results, time had its way with people. Over the course of the next few weeks, the faces of the congregation softened. Maybe they took pity on my pathetic attempt at tonguey greatness, or maybe I had spent the requisite time contrite. Slowly, then all at once, I was back in the fold. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
That's Kevin James Thornton reading from Big Baby on Endings, Beginnings, and an Interdimensional Cat. And Like I said, Kevin, it's such a different telling than the auto-tune version, but I like what you said, that there was maybe something healing about recasting it in that way and sort of just sharing it widely. And I don't think that erases the original story. Obviously, you still carry it with you. You're telling it in this book. But I think there are times when you can feel healing about something that might have still left a pretty big scar anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I thought I was all healed up. Like I said, these stories are 30 years old. And as I started telling them again, more just in the absurd, like, listen to this insane thing I did when I was a teenager, hearing other people say that it did something to them and they related with it and it was in some way similar to their story, it's changed me in some way. And it's made me think about that younger version of myself and sort of reach back and connect with that person again. And it's been good for me. It's been good to, like, be kind to a past version of myself that I thought I was done with.
And when you say you're done with it, did you just feel like, did you have contempt for that person, or was it just like, doesn't even feel like part of who you are? Like, what was that feeling for you?
I was just so worn out with Jesus and worrying about the afterlife and worrying about, does God care what I do with my genitalia? And I had just worn it out. And I got to a point in my life, especially like toward the end of my college years and into like young adulthood, where I had just thought about that stuff enough for 3 lifetimes. And you know what I mean? It was just sort of a burned out on spirituality kind of feeling.
Yeah.
So I sort of entered young adult life just kind of done with that. And sort of just like, you know what? That gets no more of my attention. And that seemed like that was the end of it for probably 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you pull it out as a story that you can share. And it sounds like it suddenly was connecting with people, and maybe that's kind of what brought you back to think about it a little more seriously.
Yeah, it's just sort of a happy accident. When I started telling the stories on social media during the pandemic, I was just at home like everybody else. And
Yeah.
I was like, and the more I told those stories, the more people were tuning in, like, let's hear more of those stories. I'm like, okay, I haven't thought about this in a second, but here's this other thing that happened, and you start turning those wheels and it brings the memories back,
Yeah. Yeah, it's like these doors open up.
Yeah.
Like if I drive on the streets where my house was that I grew up in, it's like literally like opening a box. It's really weird.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, that's that melancholy thing. It's nostalgia and melancholy and sort of looking back and like pondering where you came from. That's where I exist. I love that stuff. Yeah.
So you mentioned college. You decided you had to get the hell out of the hometown situation. You went to Central Indiana State College. You decided to pursue, like most guys who are trying to become as straight as they possibly can, you decided to pursue musical theater.
Yes.
And but this is where you really got to spend some real time inside of a world where being gay was all right. Here's a quote from the book. You say, I met actual lesbians in the wild, just living their lives. More than that, I'd never been around people who couldn't care less that there were lesbians in the costume shop, just living their lesbian lives, making lesbian costumes with their lesbian sewing machines. The world's cracking open here. This is a different world. It's inviting you to consider.
Yeah. It was the first time in my life, which sounds maybe like it doesn't line up, because I spent a little bit of time in New York City before this.
Right.
And even in my very brief time in New York.
Where you first kissed a man, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Like there were some experiences in there, but I still somehow managed to keep myself feeling like I was separate from all of this worldliness.
Right.
And when I showed up at college, I was in a different place. I was ready to not separate myself anymore. And so when I showed up at the theater department of this big state school, and suddenly there were gay people, and like in that story, the people in the costume shop were gay, and it was way closer. It was we weren't in a club in New York City. Now we're in a tiny little theater department room, and I am participating. And these are now my friends. And it's hard to explain, but in that moment, again, pre-internet era, so my mind was not exposed to as much as it would be, to a young person today.
Right.
It was the first time in my life where I was suddenly around people, not only gay people, but people who were not gay, but they absolutely did not care if anyone else was.
Yeah.
And I somehow didn't even understand that was a possibility. I know that sounds crazy today, but at the time it was just like, wait, there are gay people and we're not really going to even think twice about it or give it any of our energy at all.
It's almost incidental instead of all encompassing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. That's a great way to put it. And it was a real turning point for me of like, wait, this has consumed my entire interior world up until this point. At that point, I'm like maybe 21 years old. And I'm like, wait, I don't have to think about this that much? What?
Was that scary at all, too, though? Because here, at
terrifying.
This point, you're still kind of a Christian believer. I mean, you joined the campus soul wave or whatever, the kind of cool Christian group.
Yeah. So when I went away to college, it was definitely sort of escaping with my life and sanity. I knew instinctually I needed to get away from my hometown.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't have the reasons why totally thought out. And when I showed up at college and into this theater department, it was not like a light switch. We were now in sort of a slow transition where I was ready to do something else. I was ready to think about something else. But yeah, my first couple years of college, I still went to a super fundamentalist Christian campus church.
Yeah.
That, but I was now in sort of a transition phase. I was ready to walk away, but I couldn't do it instantly. It was going to be like a slow walk.
Did you know, that's the question is, did you know it would be a slow walk out, or is that a retrospective awareness, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's absolutely looking back. And when people say like, what was the turning point, or when did you finally decide you were okay with yourself? And there was never a singular moment for me.
Yeah.
The whole thing was this sort of slow motion. It was still intense, but I drug it out for a decade.
Yeah, there was some big things that happened that could have been that moment. I'm thinking about there's this chapter about crossing the lawn where you're involved with the campus church, but you're also involved with this theater group, and you've kind of got these two worlds cooking. You're actually dating a boy. You're dating, sort of seeing this guy named Brad who's hot. You love this, but you're also doing the Christian thing, and it all comes together. These worlds collide on the lawn at school where you're with Brad, and then your Christian fellowship friend is like, "Hey, what's going on here?" And I think he said something about you said you were struggling with homosexuality or something like that, which Brad heard and was like, "What the hell? You're I thought I was your boy. What do you mean you're struggling? I'm your boyfriend."
Yeah, it was God. It was, I made a mess of it. It was a mess of my own making. But during that era, it was funny the way it was even set up, because the back doors of the theater department opened up onto the same lawn of the back doors of the building across the way where the campus church met.
It's so on the nose. Like a producer of a show would have done this to save time building a set or something.
Yes. Yeah, but so these two groups, and again, this is like 1996 or something.
Yeah.
So these two groups that were like opposed to each other, the doors literally opened onto like the same battlefield. And during that era, like on Sundays, I would go to the church and then I would be that person and we'd all go out to dinner and talk about church things.
Yeah.
But then Monday morning, I'd go back to my acting class and be kind of I was sort of experimenting with two different people.
Yeah.
And
it seems like without consciously thinking of it that way at the time, right? You were just being you.
Of course. Yeah. This is only looking back. I can see so clearly, it's almost like an early 80s sitcom plot where or there were a lot of plots in those sitcoms of that era where someone had two dates to the prom.
I think every show did that. Yeah.
Yeah. They had to run back and forth between the two dates. That's what I did.
I'm actually recording a second podcast right now. So whenever you're talking.
Oh, great.
I'm going to my other guest and interviewing them. So just
yeah, of course you are. Yeah.
But this moment I thought might crack you open because Brad, you really liked Brad. And then he witnessed this moment with this fellowship. And I was like, cool, this is probably the moment that kind of busts. But like you said, it was something that took a lot longer for you to really distinguish for
Yeah.
yourself.
I didn't realize how cruel I was being to that guy.
Mhm.
You know, I was so caught up in my own personal drama. And it
Yeah.
was, you know, and I have to forgive myself for that
Sure.
because it was a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah.
And I was 21 years old and I was not equipped and I was dealing with it mostly alone. You know, so I have to look back and forgive that guy.
Yeah. And your prefrontal cortex was still developing. So
It was totally, yeah.
yeah.
You know, but when I look back, I'm like, oh, I really put that poor guy through it.
Yeah. It's a painful chapter.
Yeah, and we really loved each other.
Hmm.
But it was sort of 21-year-old, you know,
Yeah.
not fully developed prefrontal cortex love.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, you end up finishing school late. That kind of blows up some school stuff, if I remember correctly. You end up finishing school a little bit behind that cohort, kind of by yourself. And this is when you move to LA with probably the most healthy relationship I've ever seen, your relationship with Will, which I think is a pattern for any couple would want to follow. You and Will's relationship. Am I wrong? I mean, you tell me.
It was really wonderful in every possible way. And that's how the book ends with me and no.
This was a hasty move in, it seems like. That you guys weren't that compatible.
You know, so yeah, the book does honestly, it's one of my favorite moments of the book, and it's I don't know how people will perceive it because, as you might expect, the first half of this takes place in the 90s
Yeah.
and that kind of journey, and then we come to sort of a pause or an ending of some sort. Like I said, the whole book is about endings and beginnings and the cycle of that over and over again.
Yeah.
But the second half of the book picks up 10 years later in Los Angeles, and as I mentioned earlier in this show, I sort of walk out into the world having made peace with myself and Jesus, but I became, I guess you could say, a lost soul. You know, I'm sort of wandering out into the world, not entirely sure who I'm supposed to be without who I was, you know, my entire youth.
Yeah.
So I end up in Los Angeles and I'm in another relationship. And yeah, it was a difficult period of my life for sure. This guy had his own little awkward journey with himself and his sexuality, and we're living in a tiny studio apartment in Los Angeles.
He wasn't out to his parents, right? That if I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
he was in a different place than I was and had, you know, almost kind of like what I did to the guy in college.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it was, now there's like a guy sort of doing that to me. He was not okay with himself and he had feelings for me, but was just wrestling with a lot internally.
Mhm.
And, you know, for that guy, it all came out in the form of addiction.
Yeah.
And we are living together in a tiny studio apartment in West Hollywood.
You got bills to pay.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm living with this sort of like person wrestling with all these awful demons in a studio apartment. And I'm just there sort of suffering through it. It's, you know, it's an intense experience for sure.
I liked that part of the book too. I liked your relationship with Deb, the boss that you had was really interesting. She seemed really cool. And you kind of were able to live out a story of a relationship in her eyes that wasn't really happening at home. Like she knew Will existed and she'd be, how's Will? But then when it all came tumbling down, wasn't she shocked of like, wait, what? What?
Yeah. And I guess, you know, here I am again living kind of doing this duality thing.
Yeah.
You know, where, I'm, because in Los Angeles, I'm beginning to pursue stand-up comedy and actually doing pretty well. And I have this job where the character Deb is my employer. And so I have, on one hand, I have this life in Los Angeles and things are going pretty great. And I'm getting on my feet and I'm breaking into the comedy scene. And that's the version of me that Deb knows.
Yeah.
And then I go home and it's kind of a nightmare. And I'm sort of balancing these two dual versions of myself.
Yeah, and why bring that to your boss, though? I mean, it's this felt kind of a different situation. Like, yeah, it's you're still living these dual worlds, but all throughout, there's these, the context almost demands these performances. That's why I'm saying it seems sitcom-like, because you keep getting thrown into these scenarios that are like perfect for difficulty and sort of tension. So, and it, like you said, you keep circling back to it, right?
Yeah, and that's what I mean. That's sort of the theme I'm exploring here of when I think about my life and the things I've been through. It's a constant cycle of, and sometimes the cycles resemble each other. But the interesting thing is, even if I'm like going through a new era, I'm going through one right now. It's like some circumstances might be familiar, or I might find myself in, and this is for everyone, I think, you find yourself in a scenario that you've been through before and you don't want to make the same mistakes again. But the interesting thing to me is each of these cycles, each of these eras, you are different. Like, even if the scenario might resemble something that you've already been through, you're not the same anymore. And I think that's an interesting thing to me to explore, of the way you change through each beginning and ending and the start of a new thing.
Yeah.
Like you're sort of carrying yourself, like a different version of yourself, into these new cycles.
Yeah,
That's sort of, I guess we're being like really, I think, sort of heady about this.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, no, I can understand that. You're a first-time caller, not a long-time listener, and on Relationscapes, that's what it's for. You know, we could just give the chronology of what happens in the book, but I'd rather people read the book and then get this sort of extra reflection on it.
Yeah.
So watch me rescue this, because I think, you know, the cycles that you're talking about, they do keep recurring.
Yes.
This is, your life just keeps unfolding. Like, I mean, next up, we have your relationship with Dean, because the relationship with Will, there's so much stuff there. People are, I mean, it's juicy as hell. Like, there's so much going on. You get into a relationship with Dean after that, and it seemed to be the most integrated you'd been up to that point.
Yeah.
But even that relationship then, by the end of the book, is ending, and that comes as a surprise. I think, to me, the ending of the book, instead of seeing all the threads weave together into the final tableau that's like, okay, I see where all of them came, your book actually sort of like opens outward instead.
Yeah.
So I wondered what it was like then writing about Dean in this book, because that you're still pretty fresh off of the end of that, what was I think a decade-long, really important relationship to you.
Yeah. So the third chapter of this, I wrote it in real time as it was sort of happening. And I didn't set out to do that. Like, even when I agreed to write this book, a lot of those things had not even happened yet. You know, I got to the point in the book where I'd written about things from the past that I wanted to write about. And I was in the middle of basically a divorce. We weren't officially married, but we were together for a long time.
And you had been engaged. There was like a...
Yeah, we were engaged. It was the longest relationship of my life. We were, you know, our lives were completely sewn together. And I was about to turn 50 years old. And that's what was unfolding as I was writing this book. And it's really all I could think about. And it's what I decided for sort of the third chapter of this entire story was unfolding in real time as I was writing it. So it definitely takes on a different tone, I think. And, you know, well, people are always like, what's the deal with the interdimensional cat that's on the cover of this thing? And it's, you know, I say at the opening of the third part of this, of I was going to lean into my imagination and almost mythology to try to describe to you what I was living through, because it was so fresh. I would have a hard time. I had no space to like look back and reflect. It's happening right now.
Right.
So I sort of turned my cat into this magical creature that's guiding me through a super painful thing. You know, that's, I can think, my tendency to like find something absurd in the middle of everything, I guess.
Yeah, and this is a cat that you'd had with Dean, right? Didn't you guys had two cats? Am I remembering
We had three
correctly?
cats.
We
had three
okay.
cats. Yeah.
And this particular cat, you went.
This one came with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got custody, cat custody.
I have custody of this cat. Yes. Yep. He's at home right now.
And it's the interdimensional cat. Were you worried about? Is I assume Dean's a pseudonym.
Yeah.
Were you worried about, like, how did Dean feel about it? Because, you know, you're not overly specific about the end of your relationship, but you know, you have a huge audience, so you have an opportunity to kind of talk about what you were going through that I assume Dean doesn't have kind of the same, and maybe he wouldn't even want it to be able to tell the story, but like, how does he feel about being part of a story that you share?
Well, he has no idea. He hasn't read the book.
Okay.
So, yeah. So
See,
we'll
I would
find out.
want to. Maybe that's just the type
Yeah.
of person I am, but I'd be like, what the hell is he saying about?
Well, I have to say, I my hope is that it will be healing for him to read what I wrote. My intention was that of kindness for him,
Yeah.
and I would think that when he does read it, that it will be a good thing.
Hmm.
That was my intent.
I mean, your relationship lasted a decade. How people always want to know, like, what happened. My brain always, when I find out someone's getting a divorce, I'm like, what happened? I want to assess, I want to see what the fault was. And I think there's also some anxiety to figure out, like, is there something I'm doing that I need to change in my life?
Yeah.
Like, could this happen to me? When you think about telling people why you guys split up, like, what's the story as you have come to formulate it now? Knowing that you don't have as much distance to be able to kind of assess the accuracy of it. But what is the basic story? And is it a shared story? Do you and Dean kind of have the same story about what happened?
I think that we do. It might be slightly different. And I do my best to describe this in the book, but there was something about being 50 years old, both of us, and deciding to start over at that point in life was it still is. I'm only a couple years past it. That's a very hard choice. Like, there's something about being 50 that feels like, okay, this is what my life is. This is my human experience. To decide at 50 to pack up and go out into the unknown again is very hard. It's very hard. And, it's not like, because I packed up and left many times in my life. But when I did it when I was 20, or maybe again when I was 30, it is way different than when you're 50.
Is it a sense of not as much time? Because it's like, boy, starting over again, you need to have a lot of runway to get something going. And maybe in your life, you don't have that runway no more.
Well, I don't know if I view it like, I guess that's true, but it's more
Oh, crap.
like...
Now I planted the idea. So sorry.
Yeah. No, I'd like to believe, with medical advances, I have a
good.
decent amount of time left.
Yes.
But, when you're 20, you can say, F it, and go get a random job to piece it together. And it just gets harder and harder to do that sort of thing. Especially when you've been through enough cycles of like, okay, I've already done this a few times in my life, and the last time sucked, and I told myself I wasn't going to do it again, and here I am deciding to put things in my suitcase and walk out the door, and it's going to be way different this time because I'm not 20, I'm not 30. There's not a little coffee shop job waiting for me tomorrow.
Yeah, or the Olive Garden.
Or the Olive Garden or whatever it is. Yeah, like I'm probably a little too old to go get a wet server job at the Olive Garden.
Yeah,
beginning at 53.
Yeah.
It's like it's not it's not that it's impossible.
Yeah,
it's
you could,
just
but you couldn't live that.
different. It's just different. Yeah. And not just the logistics of a job, it's emotionally too. It's like, wait, I've been through a lot just to get me to this point in life where I'm like stable with another person. We have pets and a house.
Yeah.
What am I doing? Am I going to leave? What? It's just, I do my best to express this in the book, but again, I'm still living through it. So it's hard to find exactly. I think in another decade, I could look back right now and verbalize it way better than I can right now. That's just sort of,
Sure, you get all that time to reflect on it, but you've written about it here and you're experiencing it right now. So how did you know that it would be a better choice for you to end that with Dean? As you said, it was not an easy decision.
there's a lot of emotion in this answer charge for me. Actually, when I read this part of the book in the audiobook, I struggled to get through it in the recording. Because the emotion of it was so fresh. You'll hear
Yeah.
it if you listen to the audiobook. I struggle to get through this part of the book. It's I think this is a thing that a lot of people experience in long-term relationships is over time, as you get older, things can fade. And it's not because anything is wrong. It's not because something bad has happened. It's just time can do that to people. And we both got to a point where things had faded, and we loved each other and we respected each other and we were living together and we had a stable home life. But time just kind of did its unfortunate thing to us. And I remember we were just talking and he said something to the effect of that he wasn't enjoying his life. That like we were just kind of going through these, like life had just become this very ordinary, unfulfilling thing. And I don't think he meant it directed at me, but when he said that, it like pierced into me. And I was like, oh my God, we have to get away from each other. Like, that's unacceptable. And I think I had been holding on because I thought it would be better for us to hold on to each other till the end. And when he expressed that, I was like, oh, as hard as this is going to be, that's not the better choice. The better choice is for us to walk away from each other and start over. And so that's what I chose.
Did you choose it with an eye toward possible relationships in the future? Or do you think Dean, like, is that even on the radar? Like, are you thinking about, that's a long relationship to leave. Are you like, I'm kind of done with relationships for now? Or is it just something that could organically happen? Like, I feel sort of driven toward, I love my marriage, my relationship. It's hard not to situate myself there and be like, what would I do? You know?
Again, that's that whole like, what does a new relationship look like after 50? After you thought you were maybe kind of done with, like, are you going to get on a dating app or what are you going to do? No, I will say it was the right decision because for what I have felt in my own life in the last couple of years, what I have observed from afar in his life, we broke the spell with each other, and it was for the better. I think when it was happening, I would have said, never again. I don't want another relationship. No, thank you. And he even verbalized something like that as well. But now we did do the difficult task of starting over, and it's a whole new world. Anything is possible. That's the thing that I think I've discovered is that, wait, I didn't see this coming, but you can do anything at 50 years old or 60 or 70. Until you're gone, it's not over. You can do it. You can do more.
Yeah. The choice parameters are set, but you still have choices to make, I guess. Like there's still, because when you say you can do anything, like I'd love to have a number one podcast, but you and I both know that's not happening until this interview hits the hits the pod waves.
I understand why you would say that. However, I had thought my chances of any sort of stand-up comedy success were absolutely over. And the tides did not even begin to turn for me until I was 50 years old.
Yeah, it's wild.
And like, so I would have absolutely said the same thing of like, well, I wanted to be a famous comedian, but that's not going to happen. And then it kind of did.
That's
like,
well, but I missed the TikTok window. You kind of, as you've talked about, the algorithm's different now. Like we can't, it's totally different. I appreciate that though, Kevin. Why don't you can take me on tour with you? That's what we'll do. That's what this is all about.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah, but the TikTok did not even exist.
Okay.
Like the technology did not even exist.
Right. And now it's ruining the world.
You're done with this interview.
So yeah. Well, we'll see if this episode even gets released.
Oh, great.
No, I have a way to save it. Let's talk about earnestness, right? Before we get to, we always end with regrets, challenges, and surprises, and we'll get to that. But I do have a question about earnestness, and this is kind of circles back to where we started out, or where we were talking about Shamala Hamala, like the different versions of that story that you can tell. And both of those stories are true in their own way. Like when you put out the auto-tune one that papered over a lot of the emotional turmoil, there was truth in that story. The way that you tell it brings different truths in the book. And I think a little bit more earnestness. I think there's earnestness hidden in the TikTok video. You talked about being dramatic. It's a funny punchline, but it's also true. Earnestness is something that I've seen you excel at the risk of what like kids, I don't even know if they're still saying it, but like cringe is a thing now. Like, oh, that's cringe.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe being so forthright about our feelings or getting emotional is cringe or whatever. But some of your stuff has an earnestness to it that I don't see enough of on social media. And I wanted to play an example of this from a song that you put out. And if I remember correctly, this came out around the time that ICE had been shooting people dead in the streets of Minnesota. And it seems like forever ago, but it wasn't. It was just the beginning of this year, and we're still living in the aftermath of it.
I know.
But you did this, you took your tool of auto-tune jokery and turned it around into this song where there's no punchline here. And I want to play this for people really quick here.
Sure.
Today is a dark day, and you might feel afraid. And that's super valid, you should let yourself feel afraid. And you might ask yourself, am I next? And if you have to ask, the answer is yes. So let yourself feel whatever it is, and relieve yourself of the slow motion uncertainty of the inevitable. And then let's join together a collective rage and stop those motherfuckers. How far will they go? All the way. History has shown us they won't stop until they're stopped. So let's join together our collective rage. It's gonna take a long time, not just a couple of protests, like a really long time. Several years, maybe a generation.
I was in a dark place when that came across my feed, and videos like that can make a difference. It was probably better for me to get off my phone in general at that point, but I just wondered what it was like putting something like that together. What was happening with that song for you?
So actually, that was a repost. I actually recorded that on the day that Roe versus Wade was overturned.
Oh.
And interestingly enough, I could probably have reposted it again yesterday when the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act.
God, I know.
So that was a repost when I don't remember the exact day that I reposted that, but I was like, this is appropriate again. And we might have a couple more moments where it's appropriate again, because we're living through, and I say that my favorite line of that is something about the slow motion of the inevitable or whatever I say, we're living through kind of an awful period of history.
Yeah.
And is it cringe? Maybe so. I don't know. I think Generation X is sort of immune to that, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I'm just seeing other creators, and I'm not trying to disrespect them or anything, but I'm seeing plenty of other creators who aren't doing stuff like that. They're putting out their same skits, and and that can have a helpful role to play too in brightening people's lives. But like people that say something, I respect it so much more. You took a second to put something out that was direct and earnest, and it in your auto-tune, where I've laughed so many times in other contexts, and here it was something that just like really moved me.
Yeah. Well, it's a strange thing we're living through. And social media, like we talked about at the beginning of this, it has its great things and it has its awful things, and we're working through it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you put stuff like that out. And now we've got a book to enjoy. It's called Big Baby: On Endings, Beginnings, and an Interdimensional Cat, which I encourage people to pick up the book so they can learn more about that. I didn't want to give everything away. We talked about abortion. We talked about the stuff I'm sure people, given the choice between talking about abortion and Interdimensional Cat, I think most people would probably choose abortion. That's just my sensibility. But also, Kevin, I should mention you have about 3 million followers on social media. You've traveled the world doing comedy across the U.S., UK, Europe, and Canada. You were a headliner at Netflix as a joke in 2024. You have a comedy special, Be Yourself, that people can check out on Amazon Prime and Apple TV. You send out a secret Sunday message that people can subscribe to. That's a fun email thing. You've got your shop, Shamala Hamala, up. That's kind of a cool art/photography space. And you also had a podcast. You've had a few, but the most recent one, Call Kevin, which I really loved. I loved Call Kevin. I even appeared on it once.
Oh.
And people would just call and leave you messages. And that was a fun show too. So there's many things that our listeners can check out that you've done. But I do recommend probably first the book. And I do want to check out the audio version too. I think since you're the reader, that probably adds new angles to it a lot.
Yeah, I think it will be a different experience to listen to it for sure. Because, like I said, I mean there are parts as I'm unexpectedly to myself, I got choked up quite a bit as I was reading it. I'm carrying all the subtext inside of me.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, well, let's end with regrets, challenges, and surprises. Is there anything, and the book's just now coming out, but you probably finished it a little while ago, so is there anything you would change about it, or are you pretty happy with what it's in? Or you can speak to what the hardest part about writing it was, or what kind of surprises you encountered along the way, maybe a self-revelation or something from your past you were working through. You can speak to any of those, wherever the best story lands.
I knew it was going to be a difficult task. I wasn't under any sort of illusion that it was going to be an easy thing to do. And I've written quite a bit over the years in different ways. I've never written something of this length before. And also just the climate that we're in of the internet and social media, like we've been talking about. I didn't realize how my attention span had deteriorated to some extent. And there were lots of moments where it was very difficult to stop my life and focus. And I will say I bothered myself on multiple occasions with the realization that I had let my attention span suffer. And I got to the end of it. I did it. It was difficult, but I pulled it together. But now that I've done it once, I'm like, oh, that will never happen to me again. Like I've already started work on a second book, and I'm like, I'm getting my brain back. And I got it together for this first book. I'm super proud of what I wrote, and I'm very happy with it. I can't wait for people to read it. I also can't wait to continue on my writing journey with a more focused mind.
Well, I hope to read whatever you've got coming next. I will definitely read it. Kevin James Thornton, thanks for talking to us about the book today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, another Relationscapes journey comes to an end. Thanks for being here with me. And if this is your first time, welcome to the journey. I hope you'll check out some other episodes while you're here. There's a fellow traveler episode I can recommend. My interview with comedian Paul Scheer about his memoir, Joyful Recollections of Trauma. You'll want to check that one out if you like this one. And if you're enjoying the show in general, I hope you'll take a second to rate and review it in Apple Podcasts or rate it in Spotify. I actually got this very kind review in Apple Podcasts from Miss Pacell, and I know her, so maybe it doesn't count, but maybe it does. She writes, "What a gem, the show and also Blair. Every single episode is more powerful than I could have imagined, even the ones I don't think will interest me. It's because Blair's one of the greatest interviewers on the mic. I'm not just saying that. His engagement with his guests is next level. So tell your friends about the show, and don't just listen to an episode you think applies to you. Listen to them all." Lauren, thank you so much. Lauren's been a guest on the show, also a terrific interview about adoption. So you can check that fellow traveler episode out as well. Another way you can help me grow the show is by recommending it to a friend. If somebody in your life came to mind while you were listening to this one, send them a link to it. Also, if you'd like to see some video clips from this episode and some other bonus stuff, you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok. Mates of State provides our theme music. I'm your host, Blair Hodges, an independent journalist in Salt Lake City, and I hope to spend more time with you soon here on Relationscapes.